I'm basically going to just talk about a game after I finish streaming it. I have finished streaming the first Ace Attorney game not too long ago, and I kind of want to do this thing where after I finish streaming a game, I want to have a just chatting session where I get out all my thoughts about the game, because once I finish a game, I have like a lot of thoughts about it. So I thought I'd try with the Phoenix Wright series because I've played the Phoenix Wright series, the trilogy specifically, like 4 or 5 times. It's been so many times that I've played the Ace Attorney trilogy that I know it's like almost the back of my hand. I make a few mistakes here and there, but it's very rare for me to ever really get that stuck on a case. And usually I know like the next thing to do, so as you can imagine, I have a lot of thoughts in regards to the trilogy specifically. I thought I'd just kind of go through like all the cases, talk about like my favorite characters, my favorite new characters, and any characters that are like specifically for this game that don't really show up in the next game. So yeah, welcome to my Just Chatting game. And of course, everybody's welcome to ask me any questions. Probably keep it to just the first game and no spoilers for the rest of the games. I won't be spoiling anything from the later games. If I do mention anything, it's going to be kind of in vague terms. I want to keep it just to specifically the very first Phoenix Wright game, which is just Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney. So yeah, up first is the first case, the first turnabout, the tutorial case, where we get introduced to Phoenix, Mia, and Larry and Winston Payne for the very first time. The first case is an Ace Attorney. They're usually not like quote unquote the best cases because they're just meant to be like the tutorial cases. So some people like them just fine, other people find them to be kind of annoying. I know the first case and the second game people don't really enjoy all that much. That being said, from the second game onwards, and well, at least in the third Phoenix Wright trilogy game, Justice for All. It's Charles. Wow, I'm getting mixed up. Anyway, in the third Phoenix Wright trilogy game and in Apollo Justice, the first case actually kind of sets the stage for other cases. So you'll have the tutorial case that will set up basically the last case of the game, and I actually really like that. I really like it when a series can take something that gets started the first and they bring it forward and actually have it be relevant. That didn't start until like the third game and Apollo Justice, so I don't know about the other games. I don't know about Investigation 1. I think Investigations 2, all the cases kind of end up making sense in the end, or end up coming back in the end in some way. I haven't played Investigation 2. I really need to play the Investigation game. The trilogy is like the only one that I really know of like that well. The rest of the games, I finished Apollo just once, but yeah, the rest of the games are a little bit and I'm getting sidetracked. So anyway, the first case, the first turnabout, I am I find this case doesn't really stick out all that much. I'm kind of on this case. I don't hate this case naturally. It's just kind of like an okay case naturally. I think like the biggest thing that it shines with is just introducing the characters, because Phoenix and Mia get introduced pretty well in this case. You really end up liking them. Oh, you also get introduced to the judge first thing too. Same with the rest of the characters. It sets up what you need to do pretty well. It's a pretty good tutorial overall. In my opinion, I don't think there's really any complaints when it comes to explaining the mechanics, especially since the mechanics to the Phoenix Wright series are pretty... Let me know a little bit more, but... Yeah, the mechanics to the Phoenix Wright series are not that hard to explain. Once you get it, you get it. And the first case being so simple, they even show you who the killer is in the first case, which is pretty common in the Ace Attorney trilogy, up to a point, again. But they show you who it is, so that way you can just focus on the mechanics, focus on what you need to do, because you know who the killer is, you just need to prove it in court, is the big thing. So, the first case I think does a good job of that, and you get an idea of who Mia is you become kind of endeared. I've heard people say like it's not enough time with Mia because in the very next case, Mia ends up dying like very first thing. But my defense of that, at least a little bit, is even if you don't get attached to Mia in the first case, at least not, even if her death doesn't hit you as hard, you end up really feeling the impact of her death by how it affects others. Maya and Phoenix, I know like Phoenix kind of doesn't show it as much, but I do feel as if Mia's death did make an impact on him. But Maya in particular, like, you see just how much she misses her sister, how much it kind of tears at her. She's also not very chipper in the second case. But that makes sense. It's the death of her sister. So that already shows you just how much Mia meant to her. So, and then we get introduced to Larry in the very first case, and yeah, that pretty much sets the stage for Larry's almost entire character, about how he gets put into like situation after situation just because he's Larry, and how he likes the ladies. He likes to believe he's a ladies' man, but the ladies do not like him. Or at least they take advantage of him, the poor guy. Poor guy, but in the first game, like, Larry's kind of endearing. Like, I can imagine people getting kind of annoyed with him, but I think in the first game, he's alright. Like, he really does come across as a well-meaning dude who just gets into a lot of trouble. The rest of the games kind of treat him definitely more like the butt of the jokes. Like, in the third game, like... maybe I shouldn't spoil it. But yeah, in the third game, they kind of do a lot of eye-rolling at him. As opposed to the first game, where his appearances were a little bit on the minimal side. And we also get introduced to Winston Payne, who is always the tutorial prosecutor, because of how much of a pushover and a doormat he is. Like, in the beginning of the second game, the first case, he really is just a huge doormat for the witness. It's actually kind of funny. It also makes him like a good like first foil, because he's also kind of egotistical. In like the third game, you see him kind of being like this, like, they call him like the rookie killer. You kind of see him like with this pompous attitude more often than not. So anytime like you just curb stomp him, it makes him a bit more satisfying. Especially when he thinks he's winning. Sorry if I go silent sometimes. Like I said, this is my first time doing it. And of course, you get introduced to the judge, who is also an endearing character. I know some people think he gets like a little too stupid later on, but he also has some of the best lines in like the cases and stuff. So it's rather endearing how he can be kind of dumb, but in the end, he usually ends up siding with Phoenix, so that's nice. But the first turnabout is just about Frank Solid, who is a common burglar, breaking into a place and killing a woman when he gets startled by her. Again, just a very basic. There's nothing really much to talk about the actual murder and stuff because it is such a basic setup. Frank Solid, the only real impression that he leaves is kind of the way he looks, because every time like I see people do playthroughs of this game, they're like, oh, it's the Happy Mask salesman, and it's like, yeah, that Frank Solid's just straight up almost like that Happy Mask salesman from Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. Other than that, like, I think the first turnabout's a good case. It's not a great case, it doesn't stand out, but it gets the job done. It's a tutorial case. It gives the audience the impressions that they need to have. Mia with the supportive mentor character. Phoenix, who is the very nervous rookie who has a lot of entertaining thoughts. Larry, who's a quote-unquote ladies' man, who gets into a lot of trouble. Winston Payne, the prosecutor who you always meet in the first one, the pushover prosecutor. And the judge, who's a naive but well-meaning old guy. It's during the second case, which is Turnabout Sisters, that the game really starts. And that's when you can do investigations. But yeah, you can start to investigate like rooms and stuff like that. You can start finding evidence and clues, which apparently attorneys are not supposed to do. But then again, Phoenix does a lot of things he's not supposed to in these games. Nobody says anything. And that's where we're also introduced to the rest of the characters, Maya, Gumshoe, and Edgeworth. And I've heard a lot of people talk about like Turnabout Sisters and their thoughts about it, and usually a lot of people agree it's a good case. It's a pretty good case. It's very well paced. You really feel for Maya, and you really want to defend Maya. And again, even if you don't feel that connection to Mia, you eventually do. Mia's death follows you throughout the games, and you feel the impact that it has in the rest of the cases. The biggest con that I've heard against this case would be the ending, and how it's a bit of an anticlimax, as well as Red White kind of being a bit of a pushover, because during this case you're told about Red White. He's kind of built up to be this intimidating kind of witness, where he holds the court in his pockets, he holds the judges and stuff. Like, they really build up this man to be like this terrifying antagonist, but then you get him up on the stand and he's like flubbing at everything. He's not very good at testifying. And by the end, Phoenix ends up cornering him, and Edgeworth manages to get him off the hook for a bit, and then Mia kind of swoops in and saves the day. And people felt like that was an anticlimax because they really wanted to get this guy. Throughout the entire case, he's infuriating you, says the most stupidest things, and even assaults you at one point. And so they were really wanting to kind of nail this guy himself. At the same time, I can see why the case took the turn that it did. Why it was Mia who was the one to kind of deal the final blow, because she was going after Red White for a while, and it does feel like having Mia end it feels kind of right in a way, because this was the man who ruined her mother's life. So having Mia deal the final blow and take care of everything towards the end, I understand it's an anticlimax for the player, but it also makes sense for Mia to do this, and for it to basically be the ending to what Mia started. In a way, like, the ending to her life is a really weird way of putting it, but yeah. So I get why they ended it the way they did, and even Red White being bad at testifying kind of makes sense in a way, because if you look at like his trophy cabinet and stuff like that, you get the air of someone who made his way to the top, but he also didn't really do anything himself. You get the idea of this man who's very pathetic deep down inside, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if it's like, oh yeah, he was like the son of this rich guy. It's like, of course. he probably didn't build that company up from ground up. He probably got money from like a relative or something like that. And he's just kind of this pathetic guy. So him like flubbing out on the witness stand and just showing like how much of a pathetic ass he is, kind of makes sense for his character. But again, I get how it leads to being kind of an anticlimax with how people have built him up, and with how we as a player are feeling with him having killed our mentor and him assaulting Phoenix, while at the same time trying to frame Maya and having ruined both Mia and Maya's mother. He's a character that makes a huge impact in the series, but then kind of folds once you get him on the stand. If I was to make like a list of like some of the top Ace Attorney villains, I might put him on there, if only just because the impact he had in terms of like death Maya, well, not death, but like ruining Mia Maya's mother, basically making Mia into a defense attorney, and basically causing this domino effect in the Ace Attorney series through his actions. But that's the biggest thing to Red White. Other than that, he's kind of this narcissistic asshole. Not a bad villain. I don't think he's bad, but he doesn't make as big of an impact. In fact, I think I say in my stream of Rise of the Ashes, Damon Gant is what Red White wishes he was. Because I'll talk about Damon Gant a little bit later, but he is like Damon Gant is what people thought Red White would probably be, and not what he actually was. But yeah, other than that, Turnabout Sisters I think is a pretty good case. It gets you introduced to the rest of the endearing characters, including Edgeworth, who winds up being like a fan favorite. And I can imagine a lot of people having a soft spot for this case just for that fact alone. Just for the fact that you get introduced to Edgeworth, to Gumshoe, you get to introduce to Maya. So I can understand a lot of people holding this case close to their hearts, even if the ending is a bit of an anticlimax from a player perspective. I get it in terms of narrative, but in terms of us as the players, I get why we want to be the ones to finally land the final blow on Red White, even if that wasn't necessarily what ended up happening. Okay. Now on to the third case, Turnabout Samurai. So I occasionally listen to Phoenix Wright podcasts, and I remember listening to this podcast by, I think, the YouTube channel is called The Storyteller. Look him up in terms of Phoenix Wright content. He does some good things. And I remember there was him and another guest talking about third cases, and they put Turnabout Samurai in terms of like the third cases, like talking about all the third cases in the series. In terms of them, they put Turnabout Samurai like right in the middle. It's not a great case, but it's not a terrible case either. It's not bad. It's just kind of an okay case. And I think I kind of agree with that. I think Turnabout Samurai is... it's fine, but it's not... it doesn't reach, like, any high points. It's very much like a filler episode of an anime. It's a filler episode of the games. And it gets overshadowed pretty quickly because it's in between Turnabout Sisters, which had the death of Mia, the introduction of all these characters like I mentioned, and then Turnabout Goodbyes, which is, in a lot of people's opinion, of one of the best Ace Attorney cases. It has the redemption of Edgeworth, the introduction of Von Karma, so in the end, Turnabout Samurai ends up kind of being this very forgettable case. I don't think a lot of people even remember a lot of the characters from there. The characters that we do got is Will Powers, our defendant and actor, and I think he's the one who's, aside from Oldbag, I think he's the character who makes one of the bigger impacts. He comes around again in the second game, and he is also the defendant again in the first Ace Attorney stage play called Turnabout Spotlight. It's a Japanese stage play. Watch it on YouTube. It has like English subtitles. I actually recommend it. It's pretty good. But those are the only two characters that really make an impact within the case, and that's all dependent on if you even like Oldbag. Will Powers tends to get a pretty positive reception, and I myself actually do enjoy Will Powers. In terms of like characters that get introduced to this game, aside from the main cast, like Phoenix, Edgeworth, and all that, Will Powers is one of my favorite characters. I just really like characters who have this kind of scary, almost imposing appearance, but then they turn out to be like the softest kind of guys, the himbos, if you will. They turn out to have a heart of gold. They really care about like children and stuff, and Will Powers is all that. So in the end, I end up really enjoying Will Powers. I can understand if some people think he doesn't make that big of an impact, at least compared to others, but I end up enjoying him. The only other thing about this case too is it kind of has a somewhat unique motive for when you compare it to like all the other cases, because the case goes that Dee Vasquez accidentally killed Jack Hammer, all because she was blackmailed. And that's kind of unique because most of the villains in the Ace Attorney kills intentionally through one means or another. We haven't really actually had a case where I think this is one of the few cases where we actually had an accidental manslaughter. I don't think there's any other case that has that. So in terms of motives, that's actually kind of unique, and it throws a kind of a curveball at you, um, especially at like new players you're because it asks you like what's her motive, and you have to choose like there isn't one, which is really interesting because there wasn't. But that's really the only other thing that really sticks out. All the other characters, you can take them or leave them. This case all hinges on whether or not you even like the characters. Like most of the Ace Attorney cases, it all depends on if you even like the characters to begin with, how you feel about this. For me, it's okay, and I think the cast is okay. Old Bag, she can wear thin on some players, and I do agree with like the Ace Attorney community. It's like, can Old Bag take a rest sometimes? I think she appears in a lot of she appeared in like the Turnabout Spotlight stage play. I think she appears in a lot of the other stage plays, so it's like, oh boy. And the only reason why she appears so much is because Japan likes her. And that's what determines which Ace Attorney characters come back and which ones doesn't, is the reception in Japan, naturally. Because Ace Attorney series is a Japanese franchise, so that's what you expect. But Old Bag, in terms of this case, I think she's okay. I can understand some people getting annoyed with her or saying how she inhibits your path a little bit too much in this case. For me, it didn't get too grating. Nor did her stick get too grating. Because luckily she only appears in court once, and then appears a little bit more minimally after that. The pacing in this case is also a little off sometimes, because there's a point in the case where you're supposed to retrieve like a script for Vasquez, and it can feel like during some of the investigation portions, it's just dragging things out. You also have to get like a card for Cody Hackins, and as a result, the pace can feel a little sluggish at times, or like, did we really need to do this? But it's just to pad up like the investigation time. But that's like one of the biggest complaints about Turnabout Samurai. I think it's alright. The villain D. Vasquez, I think she's alright. She does her job, and she has a decent enough personality. She just doesn't stand out compared to the really over-the-top characters. And that's the thing, like, with the cases of Ace Attorney, even the worst case is technically not that bad. Even Turnabout Big Top, I could see where they were going with it. It just wound up not translating very well. Or executing very well, I guess you could say. But even this case, like, if you take it out of, like, the other cases, and you just think about it by itself, you would probably think it was a good case. It's just when you compare it to all the other cases in this game, and again, it's in between Turnabout Sisters and Turnabout Goodbyes that you really see the flaws in this case. That being said, like, the setting too is kind of interesting, like a movie set. They don't really do much with that, unfortunately. It just kind of winds up being just kind of an alright locale. A lot of trees, oddly. But again, like, nothing horrible. Again, like, this is also a thing that was pointed out in, like, the Third Cases podcast I listened to, was they try to go kind of out there with these cases, because this one's set in a movie set. The third case of the second game is a circus, and you also have like this French restaurant being the setting of the third case of the third game. But oddly enough, they wind up being like the weakest parts of those games. That's the thing, is like, in the Ace Attorney community, it's known as third case syndrome, because it feels like such a filler case that it winds up being the lowest point in the game for a lot of people. And so far, that has been kind of true. Even in Apollo Justice, the third case Turnabout Serenade, it's just kind of, eh? Like, it doesn't do anything too horrible, and you also got some plot holes in that case too, which I will talk about when we get to Apologistus, but not for now. But anyway, moving along, because I think I've talked about Turnabout Samurai enough. We got the fourth case, Turnabout Goodbyes, and this case is the standout case of the first game. It's in a lot of people's opinion one of the best case attorney cases, and I can see why. Because the first case was a tutorial case. It set up what it needed to do, it did what it needed to do, but by the end there isn't much to talk about aside from the introduction of characters. The second case is a good case, like it's a pretty good case, and it has a big impact within the series, but it also got some few points that people felt like were a little weak or could have been done better, such as the climax of it, or even if you do agree with the climax of it, it does wind up feeling a bit lackluster in terms of player interaction and how we handle the case ourselves. The third case is, again, okay, like, it doesn't do anything horrible, it's just an alright case. Also, sorry if I'm saying like a lot, that's kind of like my go-to word. I'll try to keep that down to a minimum. Take a shot every time I say like, you'll be drunk by the end of this cast and in the hospital. But the fourth case really stands out because not only does it have a huge impact, it's also pretty decently well paced. The characters stand out. I think the most forgettable character in the fourth case would be Yanni Yogi. And even though you don't completely forget about him, it's just that there are so many other things happening that he kind of gets overshadowed. But yeah, the characters, the case, and this is also basically where the start of Edgeworth's redemption. And Edgeworth being so many people's favorite character, I can understand why so many people would really like Turnabout Goodbyes. I ran a poll on my Twitter asking people, okay, between like the last cases, quote-unquote last cases, of the trilogy, which ones were your favorite? It was like Turnabout Goodbyes, Bridge to Turnabout, and what was the third case of the second game? Whatever. Yeah, you guys get what I mean. And while it didn't get like a ton of votes, there was quite a few for Turnabout Goodbyes, which kind of surprised me because I usually, when I talk about like cases that are my favorite, I usually switch back between the last case of the second game or the last case of the third game, because I find those to be some pretty strong cases. But even think about like Turnabout Goodbyes, I do get where a lot of people are coming from, especially if your favorite character is Edgeworth. I feel like if you like which fourth case of the Ace Attorney series comes down to which characters you really enjoy. If you really like Edgeworth, you'll really like this case and you'll feel like it's a very strong case. If you really like Phoenix, the last case of the second game, you'll really enjoy that for the character conflict it brings to him. If you like Maya, then the last case of the third game you'll probably really enjoy, as well as the prosecutor for that case, because Maya has some really good character moments in that last case, and so does the prosecutor for that case. Not gonna spoil it, who it is, we'll talk about when we get to him. But yeah, I also like how Turnabout Goodbyes also employs another case. You heard about the DL6 incident in Turnabout Sisters. It was the case that got Mia Maya's mother ruined. It comes back in Turnabout Goodbyes, and it turns out the victim in that case was Miles Edgeworth's father, Gregory Edgeworth, which is a great reveal. I really like that reveal. And how that case not only ruined Mia Maya's mother, it also ruined it also kind of ruined Miles' life, quote unquote. As while Edgeworth does come out being a better person, and he still sticks to being a prosecutor, if DL6 hadn't happened, Miles Edgeworth might have been a defense attorney. There's pretty much a 100% chance he would have followed in his father's footsteps. taking over his agency, all that. So this case had a huge impact on his life, and he even got taken in by Manfred von Karma, who turns out to be his father's murderer, which is just all kinds of twisty. Ace Attorney is some of the best drama ever, because wow. But yeah, I really like cases that can kind of weave together two cases that at first seem disconnected, but then you actually turn out to have a connection somewhere. Again, Apologist just does this with the first case and the last case. Same with the third game, does it with the first case and the last case. And I think they play pretty well here, because Rise of the Ashes also does this, which is the next case. But Rise of the Ashes kind of starts with this inciting incident, and then throughout the course of that, you almost forget why you even started Rise of the Ashes, like what the starting point for Rise of the Ashes was, because so many things happen and so many things. Like when it comes to this case, though, you never forget Yanni Yogi, the fact that Miles Edgeworth killed a man out in the middle of a damn lake. And then it goes into like the DL6 stuff. After you handle the initial thing that Miles is accused of. Also, this case has a little bit of a nitpick. If I can nitpick a little bit at this case. Von Karma keeps mentioning the fingerprints on the gun, and how that's the thing that ties Miles to being the murderer, is that he had the fingerprints on the gun, and the whole it coming from the wrong hand. Oh, he just wiped it and held it in his other hand. Like, that's stupid. That's really stupid of Von Karma. But at the same time, it's like, okay. I guess it just shows how bad the legal system is in Phoenix Wright. But also, if Miles Edgeworth really did all this effort to take a man out in the middle of the lake, why didn't he just drop the gun in the middle of the lake? Why didn't Phoenix ever bring this up? Like, apparently, like, Miles Edgeworth has the foresight to take a man out in the middle of a damn lake, but he doesn't have the foresight to drop the gun in the middle of the damn lake. Like, they could have still found it, yeah, but it would have taken away the fingerprint situation. So yeah, honestly, I'm wondering what would have happened if Phoenix did bring that up. Because I don't know if Von Karma would argue against that, but that's just a nitpick. You don't ever really think about stuff like that when you're playing this case, which is what a story is meant to do. Is you get really involved in this case and you really feel it. Especially, and what I like too is when Miles Edgeworth is convinced he has killed his own father through the nightmares of his childhood, it sounds plausible. It sounds like something that could have really happened, so you are kind of questioning it. And on top of that, somebody brought this up on Tumblr, I believe. But the first two cases, you see very clearly who the murderer is. You don't really see who it is in the third case, Heard About Samurai, but that's only because of the twist of it being an accident. However, this case employs the whole, quote-unquote, you see who the murderer is in Edgeworth. So the first two cases have already conditioned you to be like, oh, the person who's shown in the opening must clearly be the one who murdered him, and it shows Edgeworth. And even if you, the player, don't believe in Edgeworth, it's because Phoenix believes in Edgeworth so much. Like, even if you're not sure as a player, it's Phoenix's conviction that Miles would never do this that gets you to believe him. As well as what he did in Turnabout Samurai, which helped you out a bit to show that he wasn't just the demon prosecutor, that he was actually a guy with a heart. Hello! Hey, Starstruck! Or Starluck. Sorry about that. Welcome to my stream. I'm just talking about the first Ace Attorney game. Doing this almost like a podcast kind of style, so feel free to ask any questions, throw in your inputs, your hat in the ring, and sit back and listen to the sounds of Ace Attorney. Yeah, I was just talking about the fourth case, Turnabout Goodbyes, which dealt with Edgeworth murdering a man out in the middle of the lake, and the murder of his father. This case also introduced Manfred von Karma, who is a terrifying prosecutor, by the way. Anytime, like, I see people playing through this game blind, and they first hear von Karma's objection, that is one of the most jarring things in the world. It comes almost completely out of nowhere, too. And I am fully convinced that von Karma was in a metal band in high school, and nobody can convince me otherwise. Like, either in high school or in his college days, he was the lead singer to a metal band, to an underground metal band. Because that is one wicked-ass voice. And it's the combination of his voice, his demeanor, everything that gets said about him before the trial even begins. Like, Miles Edgeworth looks you dead in the eye and tells you that this man is even more intimidating than him, and you need to be taking this seriously. And you feel that. Anytime you're pressing a witness, you just feel like von Karma pressing down on you throughout the entire case. And he hardly ever lets up. So, he leaves quite an impression on you when it, as a first-time player, whenever you're playing through the series, he leaves such an impact. And somebody brought this up, but he's not even that good of a prosecutor, if you really think about it. He just bullies everyone into his way of thinking. He's not even that good. But just how intimidating he is, makes quite an impression. And of course, when it turns out that he's the one who murdered Gregory Edgeworth, it doesn't end up being that much of a surprise. How he did it was pretty kind of wild, and down to kind of sheer luck, but what can you do? He still murdered Gregory Bass. Also, I know that you see him in Investigations, I think 1 or 2, and to meet von Karma as Gregory Edgeworth in those games must be something wild. To meet your murderer in those games. Okay. It makes me very intrigued about the investigation games. I really need to get on that. But also, this case also has one of the best Phoenix Wright moments of all time. Aside from the almost Christmas means it wasn't Christmas line, but also the interrogation of the damn parrot. I love that scene so much when you're interrogating the parrots. And the build-up is just hilarious too. Again, seeing that moment for first-time players is so good because von Karma makes that line about how you should interrogate the parrot, and Phoenix brushes off at first like, yeah, very funny, but then he's like, wait. And first-time players are like, no, we are not. Like, they have the same reaction Maya does. It's great, I love it. I will never forgive the anime for not making that scene as funny as it was in the game. But yeah, I think that just about wraps up my thoughts on the 4th case. I know I'm kind of rambling, this is kind of my first time, so I'm kind of going everywhere at these points, but this isn't meant to be too serious, it's just kind of, again, airing out my thoughts about it. But yeah, the 4th case is a great case. I personally really love it. It has a lot of great moments. It has a lot of great moments involving Edgeworth, Phoenix, and Maya. Maya, who gets put through the ringer throughout all of these games. Like, poor Maya. And it has a very tearful resolution with Maya going off to train more. And I could see, like, this case, how a lot of people like really ended up falling in love with the Ace Attorney series just by the ending of like this case, as well as also the previous cases, and how it sold like really well, got a sequel greenlit and all that. You can really see how the series ended up being as good as it was from these cases. But while that was the last case in the original Game Boy Advance release, it was not the last case in the DS release, as well as the official English translation, as we have the 5th case, Rise from the Ashes. Alrighty, so Rise from the Ashes, the 5th case, that introduces Lana Skye, Emma Skye, and Damon Gant. Damon Gant, who is in my opinion one of the best Ace Attorney villains that we have gotten. And whenever I talk about, or whenever, or whenever I hear people talk about, because the first time I really talked about an official state, anytime I hear people talk about Rise from the Ashes, it's it's kind of fascinating because this game gets such a mixed reaction from so many people for so many different reasons. And I can see why. Because on one hand, this case is not as good as Turnabout Goodbyes. It comes right after Turnabout Goodbyes. And there are some flaws with Rise from the Ashes. Kind of almost glaring flaws. But it really depends on how you personally feel. For instance, the biggest con against Rise from the Ashes, and the biggest thing to kind of get over when it comes to Rise from the Ashes, quote unquote, is its pacing. Rise from the Ashes feels like a long case. And it is a pretty long case, especially when you consider the first time you played through this case. The first time you probably played through this case is probably blind, and not knowing like where to go, what to present, it can feel like this case drags on for a while because you have to present to a lot of different people, a lot of different things in order to get the reaction and the talking points that you need in order to progress through this case. It's one of the hardest cases in the entire game just because you're not entirely sure what you're doing for a good chunk of it. Also, I'm getting kind of distracted by the Ace Attorney music. But yeah, through a good chunk of it, you're not really too sure what you're supposed to be doing. Even, like, I played through these cases, like, a lot. And even I can get kind of, like, stumped on this from time to time. But even when I'm, like, straight shooting, like, through this case, like, this case took me... Let me see, the last stream was, like, 6 hours, roughly. It took me, like, roughly 8 hours to complete this case. And granted, I'm making commentary and stuff, so you could probably take off like an hour or so, but yeah, this case alone is very long, and as a result, you end up having to remember a lot of information. Like I mentioned when I was talking about Turnabout Goodbyes, about this. Oh man, this was really good, sorry. When I'm talking about like Turnabout Goodbyes, and how Turnabout Goodbyes, you start off investigating this one case, but then it slowly becomes this other case, and they handle that very well. In Rise from the Ashes, it does the same thing. You start off with this case, and then you kind of go into another case, but it's handled a bit more abruptly than Turnabout Goodbyes. And again, that's probably because of how long it is. So you end up kind of forgetting that you're investigating the murder of Detective Goodman, and instead end up solving this other case that, while they know who did it, the details remained unsolved for a while. It was a case that, even though they got the right person in the end, the details of how and why remained a mystery. Phoenix, of course, discovered it. Which, of course, ties into the murder of Detective Goodman. And I've heard some people don't really like that, where it should be about, like, Detective Goodman, but then we end up on this completely other thing. And to be fair, though, I think the murder of Detective Goodman is good. It's a pretty good head-scratcher. And it's pretty damning for Lana, because for the murder of Detective Goodman, she is spotted killing him, quote-unquote. It turns out not to be him. It turns out to just be Lana stabbing his dead body because of what happened in this other case. But... Oops. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. I lost. But, yeah, then we go into this... But then we go into the dark serial killings, where Emma was nearly killed, and Damon Gant used that incident in order to blackmail Lana into following his orders, which would lead to him killing Detective Goodman and Lana trying to cover it up. I think while this case does have a lot of sore points to it, aka pacing, how much information you have to retain. You get a lot of evidence throughout this case. This case takes up so many slots of evidence, and you have to remember which one goes with which isn't as bad as I'm making it out to believe. It's not like a detrimental kind of thing, but still. I can understand why your first time playing through this, you would get really frustrated, and why this would be... If you did pretty well in the other cases, this would probably be one of the first times you get a game over in the series. Especially since the trials can last for a while, too, in this. But while it does have a lot of sore points, I think what ends up making this case work is some of the good points that it brings up. For instance, this case, Rise from the Ashes, has one of my absolute favorite Phoenix Wright character moments. I absolutely love what Phoenix does in this case, where you're towards the end. You know who did it. You know Damon Gant did it. You just have to prove it. And Damon Gant's a really good villain in this case too. He really gives you a run for your money in this. And Phoenix managed to corner him by using his own logic against him, specifically the logic of evidence law. And just that entire scene where Damon Gant tells, because everyone believes like Emma Skye murdered Jake Marshall's brother, Neil Marshall, and Phoenix. It looks as if Phoenix just proved that in court, and everyone's kind of like running him down for it. Like Damon Gant's telling him, "How does it feel to be convicting a little girl of a murder?" Lana Skye's yelling at you, and Phoenix just calmly says, I have one last thing to do, and that is to figure out who actually killed Marshall." Just that whole scene is so good, and it really highlights what I really love about Phoenix. I think it really highlights Phoenix's intelligence, too. Because a lot of people give Phoenix some flack at times for missing certain things, but by the end of the day, he is a very intelligent character. And I like how that whole scene, Mia didn't help him at all. Like, she helps him, like, a little bit in Rise to the Ashes, but a lot of it is Phoenix. A lot of it is both Phoenix and Edgeworth just working together in order to solve this huge conspiracy, in a way, and I think that's a pretty good highlight to it. How much you also really like this game depends on how forced you feel it is, because I have gotten into conversations with people who feel like this case is entirely unnecessary, who feel like it's just kind of shoehorned in the series. And to be fair, at some points I can see what they mean. On the other hand, considering this was kind of just shoehorned in, I actually think they did a pretty good job of incorporating it into, I guess you could say, the Ace Attorney lore. This case also makes a lot of sense in terms of like dual destinies when they talk about the Dark Age of the law. This case would make a lot of sense for the later events of Ace Attorney 6. I don't think they ever fully capitalize on an Ace Attorney 6, but missed opportunity right there. But yeah, and also, like I said, Damon Gant is probably one of the best villains in the series for this case alone. Just his presence, that stare he gives you, and I mentioned this in other streams, but it's like, he feels like the asshole, boss that is just a little bit too nice. He feels like that boss that's a little bit too nice, and as a result, you feel like he's off. I played this game with my friends at one point, my sister and my friend, and when I asked him, what do you think about Gant when he showed up, they were just like, I just don't like him. Especially after what he does to Edgeworth when he first appears, making Edgeworth out to seem like he's incompetent. That's kind of the first... His attitude and what he does to Edgeworth is kind of your first little clue that there's something up with him. There's something not quite right with him. And of course becomes as no surprise that he ends up being the murderer. But I also like when he finally gives in, and he does this whole speech about how, with Phoenix and Edgeworth around, things will get better. And I do like how he does go out with Dick and beat. Well, Karma also kind of does too. When towards the end, when they're kind of beat, and they just kind of go, and just get on with it. Yeah, Von Karma kind of does have a breakdown, and so does Gant. But but in terms of Gant's breakdown, it lasts for like a couple minutes, and then he actually ends up praising the people who caught him. Which is nice. I feel like it gives Gant a little bit more class. Like I said, David Gant is what Red White wishes he was. He's a competent villain who has control, realistically has control over the courts, over the police department. He's someone who got into a very high position of power through what you feel like is his own volition, making him a very credible threat. And he makes good on that threat because it is so hard to finally get him. But when you do, it is very satisfying. I think Rise from the Ashes has a very satisfying conclusion, and that's probably one of the highest points to Rise of the Ashes. Is when it does have emotional moments, and when it does get things right, they get things right pretty well. It still doesn't wind up being like one of my highest. I wouldn't rank it. If I was doing like a top 10 list, I probably wouldn't rank it on that list. Or if I would, it would probably be towards the lower tier, like 10, 9, or 8. But just for like the great moment that it has with Phoenix alone, just for its conclusion, for some of its twists too. Some of its twists are genuinely pretty good. Especially the twist concerning Emma Sky. Because again, it's another twist that's similar to like the DL6 one, where it sounds plausible. It sounds completely possible. You can imagine how that could have happened, but it's also one of the worst endings. It would also be very poetic in order to, kind of poetic and tragic, in order to get one sister off the hook, you have to convict another. That would be so tragic. And it would fit in with a lot of other series, but an Ace Attorney where justice prevails and it's a very optimistic series, it doesn't wind up being the truth. It winds up being a fabrication of somebody else who was pulling the string. But yeah, so in terms of that, I think Rise from the Ashes is overall a good case. I'd put it solidly in the good category, maybe even in the very good category, but it does have its drawbacks. Again, it's a pretty long case, especially if you're doing it for the very first time. It can get pretty tough, it can get pretty tricky, and it also depends on how much you really like the characters. We're introduced to Angel Starr and Jake Marshall. Oddly enough, like a lot of the characters that we're introduced to, it's a long case, but we're not introduced to a lot of characters, really. It's either comeback characters or Angel Starr, Jake Marshall, and Officer Meekins. Those are kind of the only witnesses we're introduced to. Even Officer Meekins gets accused of murder at some point. Jake Marshall and Angel Starr, they're kind of the only ones that don't get accused of murder, though Jake Marshall did end up breaking into the evidence room, so nobody in Rise from the Ashes is completely clean. Everybody did something shady. Although Emma is a bit more. I also find some people who find Emma to be a forced character, because they believe she is like a copy of Maya. Like almost a straight up copy of Maya, down to like her parents being similar to Maya. And also kind of her personality. Granted, with a more science-y kind of twist to it. But there are some people who just end up not really liking her. So I think that might also heavily impact whether or not you like Rise from the Ashes. I like Emma. I think she's fine in Rise from the Ashes. I can understand her science stick getting kind of on some people's nerves. But I think the emotional moment she does bring to the Rise from the Ashes does help elevate it. And I think she does get better in Apologist. She returns in Apologist. And I like her personality there. She kind of goes away from being the quote-unquote Maya substitute, if you will. But yeah. Also, I feel like Rise from the Ashes was meant to echo Turnabout Sisters. I don't know if anybody else feels that way, but yeah, I feel like this was also almost kind of a redemption sort of case for Phoenix in a way. I don't know if I'm using the right word here, but he saves Lana, who looks a lot like Mia. So in a way, it might be. You could also twist it to make it into a case about how Phoenix ends up kind of. If Phoenix had any guilt about Mia's death, this is kind of his reconciliation with that. Because he ends up saving Lana. He ends up saving two sisters. One who looks like someone that he couldn't save in the past. Which adds a very kind of sad, somber tone to it over this music. Yeah, it adds kind of a somber tone to Rise from the Ashes if you want to think about it from that perspective. Although, I don't think the game's dialogue ever really goes into that. The game itself, I like to think of it as in terms of ads. Like Phoenix kind of reconciling with himself, I guess you could say. And finally being able to save someone that he couldn't in the past. But yeah, those are all the cases in the first game. I think for the most part it's a very solid lineup. Even the cases that even the case that's the worst, Turnabout Samurai, has something really good to it. It has, or not like really good to it, but at least has something kind of unique to it, like the motivation to it. And like Will Powers ends up kind of being an endearing character to me. Old Bag's okay. But even the lowest point of the Ace Attorney series is only low because of how high the series gets at this point. I'm not talking about 420 here. The emotional moments and the really good moments in the first game are some of the highest in the series. And it takes a lot to like really top like a lot of these cases. The rest of the games are pretty good. I can understand if this game is a lot of people's favorite, simply for the fact that you get introduced to these characters. It has Edgeworth as a prosecutor throughout most of the game, and it also has a lot of really good stories, a lot of good twists to it. But yeah, overall, I think the first Ace Attorney game is pretty great. It's pretty great, and I can also make a lot of good cases for why it would be the best in the trilogy. And I don't think I could really argue against somebody if they thought it was the best in the trilogy. For me, it usually goes back between either the second or the third game. Because the third game has a lot of really good solid lineups to it, and I think the second case of the third game is pretty underrated, actually. But the second case, the last case of the second game, is just such a gut punch. And it has a lot of really good moments to it. Yeah. So, let's go on to the favorite characters of the series. So, this case, you get introduced to pretty much all of the biggest main cast. Gumshoe remains the detective throughout the rest of the game. You do trade off prosecutors throughout the game, so the next game will have a different prosecutor, but Edgeworth does get mentioned in later games, of course. And of course, Maya still remains as your assistant, so this game, most of the people that you get introduced to are mainstay characters. In terms of my favorite characters out of the cast, I really love Phoenix. I really like him because of how relatable he feels, the humor that he employs, his thoughts and feelings. He feels normal, quote unquote, one of the most normal characters, but it's so entertaining how he's the normal guy in the cast, but he still has a few quirks and a few things to him that still make him very interesting. It makes him a great lead. He's a great kind of straight character for the rest of everyone else, although whether or not he is straight is entirely up to the fan base. But yeah, I absolutely love Phoenix, although, again, all the characters are great. Edgeworth is really great in this. He starts off a bit of a hard ass, and everyone brings up the updated autopsy report with him, but he also has a lot of really good moments, really good points. And there's some humorous moments too. Um, the first case actually gets a lot of the fan base's quotes from it. Edgeworth's quote, in particular, is "Objection, that was objectionable," which is just a great, funny moment when Phoenix actually makes a really good point in court, and Edgeworth can't say anything about it. Phoenix also has the "almost Christmas" line. I think there was a different translation team for this game as opposed to the rest of the game, so the rest of the games might have a bit of a different feel in terms of their translation. Nothing starkly different, but I think that might be one of the reasons why, like, this case does get a lot of really good quotable lines. Or this game gets a lot of really quotable lines for the fan base. But, yeah, in terms of, like, favorite characters, Maya's also really great in this game. She winds up being very endearing. In the second case, Turnabout Sisters, she's kind of melancholy. She's not as bright and vibrant, but that's because her sister died. So it's understandable. But her being like a bit more melancholy, she winds up becoming very endearing to you in the second case. You end up feeling very sorry for her, and you just absolutely fall in love with her. At least I did for the second case. And then in the third case, you see a lot more of her bright, chaotic energy, especially when you are tasked with defending the Steel Samurai, which is her favorite character from the show. So the second case shows her serious side, but the third case really shows her more charming, like, bright, enthusiastic side, and just the outward personality that she has for, like, most of the cases. But the fourth case shows her insecurities. It shows what she's really feeling, because she wants to be useful for Phoenix. Of course she does. This is the man who helped her out of a really tight spot. This is the man who her sister trusted and asked to help. So of course she wants to help out Phoenix in any way, but she feels so powerless. Especially since she can't contact her sister, which is one of the, quote-unquote, at least in her opinion, few useful things she can do. When that's not true, Maya ends up being very useful to us in later ones. Just her presence alone is very comforting. But, yeah, the fourth case really shows her insecurities. And I think that's what helps flesh out Maya throughout the rest of the series, is how much she goes through and how much she really wants to help you, how much she really cares about us. And then we get introduced to Gumshoe. And Gumshoe is a great character. We get introduced to him in the second case. And at first he kind of comes across as a bit of a jerk, because... Sorry, taking a drink of water. I know I stopped it, so it must be infuriating for some people. But yeah, Gumshoe's a bit of a jerk because, when Maya gets arrested, he's kind of gloating about it. Like, buddy, you do know we're talking about a 17-year-old girl who might get the death sentence here. And he's talking about how great Edgeworth is. He also arrests you for the murder of Mia a little bit later on. Although, to be fair, that was him going off of Red White's orders. I also get your name wrong, but that's more of an endearing character trait. It's in the third case, though, where we see some of his more endearing points. When we see him in the third case for the first time, when we meet up with him, Maya kind of accosts him because he at first blames us for Edgeworth's foul mood and for making Edgeworth lose that case. But then Maya kind of gives it to him a bit it's your sloppy detective work that is making him depressed. And Gumshoe goes all silent. He goes, "You're right. I can blame others all I want, but I know what's the truth." And it's such an endearing character moment. It's that combined with how much he really does kind of care about Edgeworth, and the fact that he's not convicting anyone that we hold close to our heart, that winds up showing again his endearing side. which is actually kind of something he kind of shares with Maya. In the third case, Maya shows an endearing side. In the third case, Gumshoe shows an endearing side. And I think a lot of people, if you count on the fence about Gumshoe beforehand because of like what his actions were in the second case, I think it's the third case that really cements how much you truly love Gumshoe. And by the time you get to the fourth case, just his determination and his loyalty to Edgeworth makes him such a great guy. And you actually wind up like really loving him for it. Like, I mean, who doesn't love like a loyal, trustworthy friend? Even when everyone else thinks that Edgeworth did it, even to the point where Maya's kind of doubting it too. Gumshoe stays steadfast on. The only time he ever wavers is when the DL6 incident is brought up and Miles confesses to having murdered his father. I mean, to be fair, it's a very... Miles confessing, like, that would be very convincing. So I can understand why Gumshoe would feel that way, especially since, like I said, it feels like something that could have happened. It feels plausible. So that's why it's not out of character for everyone to suddenly kind of flip a switch and go, oh, wait, you murdered your father, because it is such a plausible thing. The only one who doesn't believe it is Phoenix. And that's partially because he found a contradiction when Miles was telling him about it. But yeah, that's pretty much like all the main cast. Edgeworth himself, when you first meet with Edgeworth, he does come across as much kind of similar to Gumshoe. He kind of comes across like a jerk, especially when he brings up the big autopsy report, and you kind of start to hate him in the second case. He's admirable for how well he does his job, but at the same time, you really just kind of want to punch him at certain points during like the second case. And sometimes during the third case, he's not as bad in the third case. But some of the points he does bring up, it's like you just want to kind of like shake him. But then comes the ending of the third case where he helps you actually catch the killer, and you start to realize he's not as bad of a guy as you might have first thought. And it's the fourth case that really starts to cement a lot of people's love for Edgeworth. Because he is great in the fourth case. You kind of get an inkling that he was a really good guy. But it's the fourth case that really cements everything. You see his insecurities. Much like Maya, you see his insecurities in the fourth game. You see what's haunting him. You also get fully what's the history behind him in Phoenix is. Why Phoenix believes in him so much. And they actually have a very cute and endearing backstory together. And while it's kind of insane for Phoenix to go to the lengths that he does for a childhood friend that he only knew in the third grade for a year, it also kind of shows you what Phoenix's own character is like, his loyalty and how he will defend people that he truly believes was a friend. Even when he sees how bad Edgeworth is in the other cases, he never wavers. And that's what also makes him so endearing. Even when Edgeworth himself fully believes it for very believable reasons. Especially since we have no idea what happened in the Von Karma household, what Manfred was telling him all these years, so him having his own insecurities and distrusting himself makes sense. But in the end, like, Edgeworth kind of comes to grips with himself, finds out everything that he knew was a lie. So his actions in the next game make sense, but you also end up feeling the tragedy behind his character from these actions. But yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why so many people like him. Who doesn't love a pretty boy with a sad backstory and damage? Who doesn't love a character like that? Like, that's like a recipe for like fangirls. Come on. Yeah, I've talked about the characters that are the mainstay. What about the characters that are unique to the game? For the most part, you get introduced to a lot of the main cast, so a lot of the unique characters don't really get much of a chance to stand out, at least not as much. the only ones that really get to fully stand out would probably be Von Karma. Willpower's a little bit, depends on if you like his character. Von Karma is the one that everyone remembers, though. He only, well, he appears in Investigations, but that's like something else, but he only appears in the trilogy in this one game at this one case, but that was enough to cement him in your mind. And the impact he has on the entire Ace Attorney universe, he kickstarts pretty much everybody's motivation in these games. Him just killing one person wound up with 2 defense attorneys, the ruination of a spirit medium who that has an effect in the 3rd game, and yeah, he basically created his own worst enemy, both in Miles Edgeworth and in Phoenix Wright. And Von Karma being like an undefeated defensive prosecutor, only for Phoenix to come swooping in and take him down is just such karmatic justice. It's hilarious. It also makes a lot of sense, too, because Von Karma, they mention this in the game, Von Karma has only ever run perfect trials. So it makes sense for someone like Phoenix to take him down, because Phoenix is the embodiment of chaos when it comes to the courtroom. He goes in and he has no idea what's going to happen. So, for someone like that to be able to take Von Karma down, it actually makes a lot of sense. As unprepared as rookie as Phoenix is, the fact that he can come up with solutions out of thin air and make them work is what ends up taking Von Karma down, and what ends up being working against Von Karma. Von Karma is not very good when it comes to surprises, apparently. Like, he completely stumbles when the parrot gets brought in, although he apparently retrained the parrot to not say DL6. So yeah, there's that. So can you imagine Von Karma just training a parrot? Can you imagine that scene? What did Von Karma go in there in the shack and say to that parrot? Don't ruin this for me? But yeah, Von Karma ends up being the standout, unique character to this game, as well as Damon Gantz, who I've already gone into why I feel like Damon Gantz is one of the best villains. The villains end up being kind of a standout from this game, if only just because their impact. Red White ends up kind of standing out, but again, that's only through his impact. Oh, and kind of his character design. He has a character design you don't forget, but his personality is just kind of Eric, narcissistic American. I think in Japanese translation, he does say American. Like, he does speak English sometimes. Like, he'll interlace English with, like, his Japanese. One of those characters. But yeah, Oldback also ends up being kind of a standout, unique character, but that's only because she keeps coming back. Whether or not you like her is entirely up to you, though. Every other character ends up kind of being forgetful in this, actually. It's usually only like the prosecutor, the defendant, or a character that ends up returning later that winds up being the more memorable ones, I think. I'm trying to think about like the other characters. April May is an alright character. I've seen some people who actually do really like April May, so there you go. Frank Sawitz, just kind of become a burglar, nothing much to say about him. Marvin Grossberg, he comes back a little in the 3rd game, but even his presence in the 1st game, he's kind of just your information hub. When it comes to certain things like the DL6 incident. He knows about that, so he ends up telling you about that. He ends up confirming that Von Karma was behind the shooting of Robert Hammond. Like, he created the plan in order to get Yana Yogi to kill Robert. But, yeah, that's Marvin Grossberg's kind of big contribution, and I don't see him get brought up a lot when it comes to these attorney characters, so I don't think he left as big of an impact. He's a perfectly fine character, I have nothing against him, but he also doesn't wind up standing out. In Rise from the Ashes, a lot of those characters actually kind of stand out, if only just because it feels like they really try to go over the top of their personalities. I remember Angel Star and Jake Marshall just because, like, Angel Star was one heck of a chick. Just one of those step on me kind of types of characters, if you know what I mean. Jake Marshall, his whole cowboy stick just really stood out to me. Like, it really feels like they try to really go out there with these characters, which I appreciate, honestly. I appreciate having a character who likes to dress up and talk like a cowboy. I actually really like that. I wish they'd incorporate that more. Meekins, he's kind of an annoying character, but I feel like that's kind of the point. I'm not annoyed with him simply because I feel like I should be annoyed with him. Like, I don't know. I actually find it to be kind of, like, pathetically funny. But yeah, those are all the unique characters to this game. Unfortunately, nothing much to really say about them aside from, of course, Von Karma, Damon Gann. Willpower's my enjoy. But that's a me personally kind of character. I don't know if anybody else. In Turnabout Samurai, Penny Nichols and Salmonella, like, Penny Nichols is kind of just an average person who goes into fangirl mode occasionally, but, like, for, like, one scene, but that's about it. Salmonella, kind of just a gross dude. Like, that you want to keep away from you with, like, a stick. Cody Hackins, just kind of an annoying kid. And trying to think of, like, the others. A lot of heart. She's a whole other thing too. She kind of ends up standing out a little bit too, but again, she comes back in the second game. She comes back twice in the second game, so I think that's why people will remember her. Again, she's a lover or a hater kind of character. I know some people who actually don't like her appearance in the fourth case, as well because she's there with Old Bag. So I know some people who wind up not liking the fourth case as much simply because those two are in the same case together, and I can kind of understand that. I can completely understand that. I don't think it really has that much of a I don't think it's that much of a detriment to the last case of the second game, but I'll talk about that when I get to that. But yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on the very first Ace Attorney game. This is a little bit new for me, and since I'm kind of treating this almost like a podcast kind of style, I will be going into the second game of Ace Attorney. I might go into it tonight. If I do, I'll post it on my Twitter. The first game of the Ace Attorney series is a really great game. It sets up what it needs to set up. You got a lot of very good twists. You got a lot of endearing characters. A lot of things get put into motion with this game that later on end up having an impact to the other games. And another thing I want to add is the way they handle deaths in the Ace Attorney franchise. You feel the impact of a lot of people's deaths. It doesn't just get swept under the rug. You really feel like they had an impact. And just the fact that one person killed one person in this game, it kickstarts so many events. I also feel like it's actually kind of true to life. When somebody gets murdered, it's not just an action that gets swept under the rug. It has an impact. Even if you're not personally involved with it, it might have had more of an impact than you might have realized. You might also create your own worst enemy if you murder someone, so, you know, if you take anything from this, it's don't murder. But, yeah, I don't think I have too much more to add, unfortunately, to this case, so I might be cutting it off pretty soon. I'll probably talk about some other stuff in the later games if I do think about what I feel about this. I would actually like to do, more videos. Actually talk about, Phoenix Wright a bit more. Maybe, ranking some of my favorite cases. In terms of this game, if I had to rank cases, Turnabout Goodbyes would be number one. I think Turnabout Goodbyes is really good, really strong. The second one might be Turnabout Sisters, because while it has a few things against it, it's a nice case. It's a nice case with some good pacing. It introduces a lot of really endearing characters, and its low points aren't too bad. I feel like a lot of people can forgive a lot of its low points. Rise from the Ashes would be third because it has a lot of really good points. It has a lot of high moments in the series. It does a lot of really good things. It has a lot of interesting ideas. It has one of the best villains in the series. But unfortunately, its pacing, the fact that it can drag, the fact that it has so much information that you need to remember, I can feel like can hinder particularly first-time playthroughs. So I can understand if a lot of people don't really like this case, and of course it all depends on how you feel about its own characters, like most of the cases. And then the fourth one would be probably, it's kind of hard between decide which was the worst case. I guess technically Turnabout, I guess technically the first case would be like the worst case, because Turnabout Samurai, again, isn't that bad. The thing that the first case got going for is it gets you introduced to the characters, Phoenix, Mia, and Larry, Winston Payne, the judge. Whereas the third case is just kind of okay. It doesn't really have anything that really stands out. The biggest thing that it has going for it is kind of the unique motive, Edgeworth helping you out, but its pacing can be a bit off. So, yeah, I guess the worst case might go to Turnabout Samurai because it doesn't really do too much for it. But at the same time, like, the first case isn't anything to really brag about. But yeah, hope you enjoyed this just chatting. I hope you guys will join me for the next one. I'll get started on the second game of the Ace Attorney series, and then once I finish the second game, I'll have another session where I'll talk about the second game. I think I'll have a bit more to say about that one, since it also has like a lot of really good moments. It also has one of the best cases, as well as simultaneously one of the worst cases in the entire series, at least according to a lot of people. So yeah, I'll probably have a bit more thoughts about that. So yeah, thanks for joining me for the stream. I'll of course upload it onto YouTube in case anybody wants to hear my thoughts on there. And yeah, I'll be seeing you guys later. Bye.